Hi there, I'm Michael Hill, and I'm here with the Canine Chronicle TV today, and we are going to be talking to Mr. Wayne Cavanaugh, who also does a lot of videos for the Chronicle. And today we're going to focus on your involvement in junior showmanship and talk about what you learned in that process and how that applied later on in life, both in and out of dogs. So let's start with first, how did you get involved in juniors in the first place?
Well, I didn't have much choice, Michael. I was born, and there it was. We had, at the time, my dad had beagles, and just started into English setters. I was probably 8 or 9 when he got into setters. And of course, I went to dog shows every weekend with him as far as I can remember. And you know, you have to watch juniors when you're a kid. You're attracted to that stuff, and you go watch other kids, and you can't wait until you're old enough. And I remember the day I was old enough, and I had an English setter and a Madras raincoat, and it was pouring, and I fell in the mud, and I won because it was sheer. It wasn't anything to do. It was pity. It was nothing to do with talent. I'm certain. But this little freckle-faced redhead kid, and then with mud all over him. But he was a good dog to show, and I had fun with him. But really, there was so much more than that. And at least with my dad, you know, he didn't get everything ready. He wasn't standing there with a groomed dog. You want to do this, kid?
Yeah.
Fine. Here's your dog. He leased me an English setter. And he
Wow.
said, here's your junior showmanship dog. Back when leasing was really common. Here's your dog. Learn to trim it. He helped, you know, and bathe it and get it ready and towel it and do what you need to do. We didn't grow as much hair or trim them quite as meticulously as is done today. But so it wasn't like I was getting ready for the national. But we trimmed our own dogs, and we'd march up to the ring. Now, it was a far different time because there wasn't a scheduled junior showmanship.
Really?
Yeah, you had no idea when it was going to be or who the judge was going to be. There was a man named Paul Nigro, who many will remember way back in the day from Popular Dogs magazine. And Mr. Nigro kept all the statistics for juniors himself. And if you had your 5 wins, you would get an invitation from him and Popular Dogs magazine to go to the garden. So it wasn't really even an official sanctioned AKC event at that point. It soon became one. So you would hang out at the dog show and you'd wait for a ring announcement, and they would say, juniors will be at 3:00 in ring 10. And you'd get there and you'd find out if it was going to be Roy Holloway or Harry Manning or Phil Marsman. There was a handful of judges of handlers who had time before the breeds and the groups that were good at this and liked the kids and liked doing it. And Roy Holloway was one of the best, and Dougie's dad. But we just march in the ring. We were judged just as they are today. And then when you placed, you went to the desk, the table, and wrote down your name, your address, your dog's name, and your age, and what class you're in. And that went to Mr. Nigro, and the stats were compiled. So it was nothing like it was today, like it is today. Yeah. But it did teach me preparation, getting ready for the show. And really, I had, you know, my dad was strict about juggling my schoolwork. There was no junior showmanship on weekdays. And if it was at school, came first. And you had to learn as a young kid to juggle these things and keep them in perspective. And I really think it helped me going forward, learning that responsibility and time scheduling.
And you were also probably dealing, like, you know, I'm sure you knew your dad's friends and those people at the show, but that gave you probably more exposure to other adults and communicating with them and learning from them too in that process, right?
Oh, very much so. We just had, you know, back on the East Coast, we had, I mean, it was just the heyday for great handlers, great breeders, and every handler was willing to give you a few hints. There was often that break time was even more pronounced then, and no one went back to their RVs. They stood around and watched or talked. So you always had someone coming when you're coming out of the ring. Some handler would say, "Hey, try this, maybe try that," and it was everybody was helping each other. And we became a pack of kids that grew up together in the sport, and most of whom are still involved in the sport in many different ways.
Wow. Were you still doing juniors when you started to go work for the birth sites?
No, I was graduated. What do they call it now? Aging out or something. And really, as I got older, for me, it was all about showing in the breed ring. So I stayed in juniors as long as I could, but again, I loved it. And I loved the friendship and the travel. But I was always expected to also show that dog in the breed. So my dad would say, you know, show them in juniors, you show them in the breed as well. And you got.
I really like that though.
Well, I think his approach, and I think it was pretty bright. It's kind of like tennis. You play with better people, and you're going to have to get better. And it was his way. He was a man of few words when it came to instructions. It was lead by example. So going in there and competing with Bob and Jane, who I eventually worked for, and they got to know me too. You know, they knew me as a little kid growing up, so it helped when I went there to work. They had some background.
And so then you worked for them, you know, as they were professional handlers, and then your career shifted, still related to dogs, but in a little bit of a different manner. How did that come about?
Oh, goodness. I never left, you know. There were so many crazy curveballs along the way, and it's a much longer story for another day. But those days from Junior Showmanship stuck with me in many ways. Our group on the East Coast at that time, Maribeth O'Neill, who's still at the AKC as, I believe, a vice president. I went on to become a vice president at the American Kennel Club as well. Bonnie Threlfall was there. Patty Proctor was there. And it was a long, some were older and some were younger, but we all knew of each other, if not each other. And it's wonderful to see these people. I lost track of a young girl I used to show with, Holly Forbes is her name now. It was Holly Howe from Clareho English Setters. And she's back now with Spinoni as a breeder and exhibitor. So yeah, it was wonderful to all stay together and over the years and see which different paths you can take. And the thing about juniors is it prepares you, if you take advantage of the lessons to be learned, it prepares you for so many different things you can do within the sport, depending on your background and what you're good at. And it was really a lot of responsibility, a lot of time scheduling, a lot of time management, and a lot of learning about the dogs. They used to ask questions back then about the breed stand.
Really?
Yeah. And you didn't have to own the dog. You know, you could just take anybody's dog. No one was going to get sued.
You had to know about the breed.
But you had to know about the breed you were showing, yeah. And my dad was, no, show your own dog, show them the breed too. And that worked for me. I learned a lot about English setters through those days. In addition to, you know, just breeding and showing at the breed level, but staying in juniors, you're competing against kids that have the same interests as you do. And it really is a bonding thing. And you realize that's a microcosm of the bond you're going to experience later on in the sport. You'll have that fellowship among people you show with, and you can
that shared experience, yeah. And a shared passion, and especially for that young of an age, that's pretty rare to experience something like that, I feel like.
Yeah, and I think, you know, it was a time in the world where you were able to your parents were able to give you more responsibility. There was less fear of what could happen, or you know, less involvement of, no one was worried about lawsuits and such things. So you could trade dogs and do all kinds of things. But the thing that was, I think, really essential was respect. You know, learning respect, learning good sportsmanship. We all wanted to win, or we wouldn't have been there. But there were three of us with English setters: Laurel Howe, Holly Howe, who I mentioned now, Holly Forbes, and myself. We all three had English setters. And there was another young man named Doug Laporte. So sometimes there were four of us in there. And sometimes we'd go first, second, third, and fourth. So, you know, you had to learn good sportsmanship, because these are your parents' friends' kids, and you're going to be probably with them at Christmas, you know? So you had to learn how to get along. And that worked for business. It worked for family. It worked for local government. It worked for everything I've been involved in.
Mm. So now looking back on that experience with either your own children or children of your friends or people that you're just meeting through the dog show world, what advice have you given or would you give for them to get the most out of the experience as it currently stands?
Well, one of the things, both our son and daughter were very involved in athletics and happened to be very good at it. Our son was in hockey, and you want to learn respect and yes sir, no sir, wear a suit to school before you play that night. That he had that going for him. And he also, I was able to, when he's having issues in the locker room with other players or as a team, what they were feeling, it was the same kind of coaching you would give in juniors as you would in hockey, as you would in baseball, working together as a team. And with you and your dog, you're a team, and you're working against and playing against your friends. And I was surprised at the similarities. And certainly our daughter was a great gymnast and a competitive cheerleader, a flyer she did things that were illegal these days, three high, doing all kinds of whoopsie doodles in the air. And you have to trust your teammates to do that. And you have to build respect from your teammates. And we've had a lot of those conversations right straight from juniors about respecting my competitors, respecting the judges' opinions, and respecting your body, making sure you're taking care of yourself to be able to do these things, and sleep and rest and exercise and everything else. It's not an easy sport. When you're a kid, it's great, but when you're a handler at 60 and you're doing deep knee bends all day and running in circles and lifting and drying dogs out of crates, it's hard on the body.
And respecting the dog ultimately, like that you're responsible for that dog's care, and that you can't be successful if that dog is suffering anyway.
Absolutely. You have to love it, and they have to love you. The best handlers that came out of juniors, well, the best handlers, period, are ones who've always had a great bond with their dog. They never forced them into anything. They knew how to make the dog want to do it. And they wanted the dogs want to be top performers for them. They want to please them. And, the Bruce Schultzes of the world, and there's so many others that are just dog lovers, and it shows. And you learn that in juniors. You can't make a dog stand there. You've got to work together from day one to form that bond. And those are lessons that go with you, Michael, throughout life, in business, in family, and everywhere else. It's respect, hard work, learning respect, and having respect for those around you, and respect for their opinions. You have to learn how to win, and you have to learn how to lose. You also have to know how to take risks. And you learn that in juniors. Maybe I'm going to push a little harder today. I've got some competition here. Maybe I've got to do things I normally wouldn't do to get the edge today. And that's true in the workforce. It's true in life.
I think that's something that is so interesting about this sport, because it starts as a passion and love as dogs, but it's a great kind of microcosmic learning space for, like you said, everything that applies to life, both family, business, personal development, and anywhere you want to go in life. It can start with just something as simple as how you're interacting with the dog and yourself.
Absolutely. My wife and Cheryl and I would take our kids to lunch once a year during their youthful athletics. I mean, right from little kids all the way up. And we would say to them, usually we had a little piece of paper contract, and we'd make them sign it and say, you're doing the sport because you want to, not because we want you to. We have nothing in this. This is your sport. This is your time, your fun. If you don't want to play anymore, you do not have to. If you don't have a passion for what you're doing, don't do it. And my father did the same thing. He would never push. He'd push. He'd make me toe the line and work extra hard. But he'd also say, when you're not having any fun anymore, stop. Yeah. I talked to some people, this old friends, some I haven't seen in years, at the shows in Monroe where I was. And I heard some bitterness from one individual in particular. And I thought to myself, if all the dogs are horrible and all the people are horrible, why you do this? why would you possibly not find something else to do? You know, so you learn to respect that passion and to check yourself and see if you really love this and it's what you want to do. And again, same is true in work, same is true in college, same is true in education. Are you taking these courses because you love them, you have a passion for them, or because you're trying to please someone else? That's never a good idea, nor is it
Such
in work. That's
or
the same for
relationships.
juniors. Yeah, on relationships for sure. You learn a lot. You get a lot of that basic structure of information for your own thinking and behavior in juniors. I just think it meant the world to me. The more I look back on it, the more I realized just how much I learned and how good that was for someone who was born into the sport. And I think it was 8 years old at the time you could show a dog in juniors, and you went.
It's incredible.
It was 10 years. You're talking about, by the time you turn 16, you've spent the vast majority of your life in juniors.
Right.
The first 8, you weren't allowed. And then from 8 to 17, was it? I forget. You were. So, you've got half your life, most of your waking, walking, talking life in the ring. So it couldn't be any more formative. I think we forget how formative those years are and how important it is to learn those lessons while you're in the sport.
Right. And I think that's what really shows. And I think that's why this is such a great conversation for people to listen to, because like even before we started recording and you're talking about going to the shows and being back and judging and the joy that you still find when you're finding a dog and seeing the presentation and the people there. Not many people can say that, that long, that they've sustained an interest and a passion that long.
Oh, that's what keeps you in it. When you have an eye for beauty and you really, really know the breed and a young puppy walks in, that's what it's all about. That's when you see the future and you're renewed by that future. And, when you see juniors these days, now I've got to say that there isn't the worst junior today is better than we were. There's no doubt. In fact, I don't judge it yet. I may, but I do judge it for ASCA and some other registries. And I hate it because they're all so damn good. They're all so good. We're just struggling out there to keep our dogs standing still. And of course, now you show these, they have best in show winners in there. That didn't quite happen. And in advertising, oh my, we'd never even dream of advertising our child or ourselves and saying, one more shy for Westminster or whatever. Just didn't work that way. But I'm glad it's progressed the way it has. And really, one of my junior fellow competitors, Mary Beth O'Neill, has done so much for junior showmanship. She got in there as a young employee and spent her life really making major contributions to the formation and professionalism of how juniors was run. And she learned, I'm sure, from the hard way, like we all did growing up in the sport. It's an amazing, wonderful way to get involved. And you're not competing against professionals. Although I highly recommend you do.
Right.
But you have that time with your friends. And when I used to do the broadcast for Crufts for the BBC for many years in England, and there was an international competition for juniors. I believe it still takes place, where there was a selection somehow of juniors that had so many wins or whatever it might be, and then were invited at that time by pedigree to fly to England at Crufts, and there would be juniors from all over the world. And I almost lost it. I was so happy with emotion the night that I walked into the hotel where we all stayed and saw 50 juniors speaking different languages from different cultures, talking together, all with that single passion about dogs. And it was profound. A moment I'll never forget.
Oh, goosebumps.
Yeah.
Well, I think that is a perfect kind of, point to end on. And I think that I hope everybody who is actively competing right now, considering competing, can kind of learn from this and see that opportunity that it presents and where you can go with it. And so that kind of carries you through the losses and the longer weekends and see kind of longer term what this brings into your life, you know, starting out at an age like this.
Indeed. And two final words, maybe it's more than two, word of advice for juniors. Ears open, mouth not so much.
Can't get better than that. Always a pleasure, Wayne. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Michael. Appreciate it.